I am here with Kerrie Obert. Kerrie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I was trying to remember this morning if this is my second time or third time on the podcast. Anyway, I always enjoy talking with you.
It's at least the second time. I should have looked that up, but
Yeah.
I'm always happy to have you.
Well, it's always fun to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Now this topic is one that is pretty personal for me because you are a key person in helping me deal with essential vocal tremor. Can you tell us what is essential vocal tremor?
We used to call it benign essential vocal tremor because it's not associated with a disease process. It's not a malignancy or anything like that. But it is a neurological disorder that causes tremor in a body part or a few body parts. It's what we call a focal or a localized tremor disorder. And often we see this in people in their hands. They'll just have shaky hands. Unfortunately, it's one of the things that can happen to the voice. And for a singer, this is a devastating diagnosis because they really don't understand why this happens. And they, meaning the physicians, it's not like we really have clear understanding of why this happens to some people and not to others. And there is a familial tendency with tremor that don't quote me on this, but it's less than 20% of the time people who end up with some kind of a tremor had a mother or a father or somebody in their family who also had tremor. But it's basically a misfiring or a miswiring of the neurological signal to whatever that body part is. And in the case of benign vocal tremor or vocal tremor, essential vocal tremor, it is a misfiring to the muscles that control the larynx. And it causes a rhythmic shaking of the voice. And this is beyond something that you would hear in normal vibrato, for example. This is, and often we detect this on sustained tones. There's a similar disorder called spasmodic dysphonia where people sort of get choked and strangled when they're talking, or they may have intermittent breathiness. And one of the ways we distinguish between these two disorders is people with tremor will really hear it when they try to hold out a note. And so they'll go e, 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 and then we'll really hear the onset of that tremor. And I think a really kind of classic, well-known case was Katharine Hepburn. You could hear that kind of shaking in the voice. It unfortunately makes people sound older, and it isn't something that they have control over. This isn't something they can sort of just will away and hope that it goes away. I became very interested in tremor many, many years ago, working in the voice disorders clinic at Ohio State University, where I spent almost 20 years of my career in the voice clinic. And this is one of those things when somebody came in and we diagnosed essential tremor, we'd sort of secretly go outside the door and shake our heads and say, gosh, what a shame. And the reason we would say that is because so many other things that we diagnose, we have treatments for. We have treatments for vocal fold nodules. We have treatments for, polyps and cysts and even paralysis we have treatment for. We don't have great treatments for essential tremor. And so we would sort of go outside the door and shake our heads and secretly think, gosh, what a shame. There isn't much we can do for this person. And that always bothered me because it always seemed like surely there's something we can do. And, surgeons offer Botox injections. There are some tremor medications that people take for tremor of the hands, tremor of other body parts. They don't work real well. The tremor medications don't work real well for the voice. And Botox injections, kind of a hit or miss. Some people seem to respond to it. Some people don't. It's something you have to repeat. And Botox, as you know, as people probably know from treating wrinkles and things. It's the same. It's botulinum toxin, which is a neurotoxin, and it basically impairs muscle movement. So you're sort of paralyzing or weakening muscles so they really can't fire at all. So they can't work very well at all. But that doesn't last very long. You have to go back and you have to repeat it. And often people kind of eventually don't respond to the medicines anymore. And so again, this left me feeling fairly unsatisfied. And over the years, I would occasionally work with somebody with tremor, and would think, can we try this exercise? Can we try that exercise? And, as I said, it's been a long interest of mine to develop something that might help people.
Well, it's interesting because you brought up dysphonia. And when it was first presenting itself to me, I thought, wow, what's going on? Am I developing dysphonia, or maybe it was just tension? And my first instinct was, okay, as a voice teacher, I've somehow gotten an imbalance. I'm getting excessive muscle use somewhere within the instrument. And so I just kept trying to relax, which actually kind of made it worse. And what you did is you really took me into the heart of the sun, where you went to the worst part of my voice and made me just drill like it was exhausting, actually, mentally, just to, and I don't necessarily enjoy it, because it was like I had to confront constantly the worst areas of my voice, and you would find ways to really challenge that. Why is that the better solution than just trying to relax and the voice?
Yeah, it's interesting because, tremor and vibrato have some kind of shared neurological origins. And what I mean by that is vibrato is by no means a disorder, but the neurological firing that happens that kind of signals the rate of vibrato and the number of oscillations, or the number of pitch variations per second, correlates with a tremor. And sort of the rhythmic shaking, if you think about somebody who has tremor, that's very similar to it's very similar to a vibrato. And I often read in the voice forums when somebody has a wobbly vibrato, a big, wide, wobbly vibrato. I'll often hear people say, oh, there's tension. And I sort of shake my head, because, when we hear something that is slower than it should be, that's an indication that it's not receiving enough muscle contraction, enough energy, and it needs increased neurological input, not decreased. And so for me, tremor kind of falls into the same category of, we need more effort someplace in the system, not less. Now, this gets a little bit confusing, because often people do heighten tension, or, trying to compensate, and they may compensate in sort of inappropriate ways. And so they may grip at the voice, or press or push the voice to try to hold it steady. And that's not really where we need the increased effort. What I have found over the years, and this, this kind of goes back, I remember many years ago reading an article about somebody who had limb tremor, some kind of hand or arm or limb tremor of some sort. And they had them go on an exercise regimen where they were really working on the agonist-antagonist muscle relationships. And what they found was that the people who did these exercises in their arms, they had reduced tremor. It wasn't cured, wasn't gone, but it was significantly, substantially reduced. And I kept thinking about, what are the antagonists to the larynx? What are the things? When you think about the larynx, it's a structure that is suspended by a lot of other muscles. So it's sort of held in place by strap muscles, and the tongue is connected to, to the hyoid bone. And so we have all these other structures that are sort of connecting and playing into holding on to or supporting or stabilizing the larynx. And I began to think about this agonist antagonist relationship, and really in a way sort of realize that all of these other structures are probably critical players in stabilizing and supporting the larynx. So my point of view is that we increase effort in those structures that are still working, still functioning, to help stabilize, to help provide some support for the larynx. We think of support being breath support, but support is so much more than that. Support really is muscular support coming from other locations to help support little tiny structures. When we think about the size of the vocal folds, they're like the moon on your nail, on your fingernail. They're just tiny little things. And so why wouldn't we engage some other muscles elsewhere to help support them? And one of those really is the tongue. And, I know some of the listeners may go, oh, increase effort in the tongue. But I think you can probably speak to how useful that is.
Yeah, you've really changed my view of the tongue. More so my real focus on it. I was never somebody that was really overwrought about tongue tension. But that tends to be something in the community. People always go on about tongue tension. And you really showed me that good tension in the tongue is vital. And the other thing I've realized is what you've been taking me through and really strengthening parts of the vocal tract that I didn't think about besides the vocal folds, is how applicable this is for the aging voice.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I have used some of these very same exercises with aging clients, because they tend to get weakness of the vocal folds. And as I said, the vocal folds don't strengthen very well. They're non-weight bearing. And so it's not like you can pump iron and just get them to strengthen. And in fact, when we do exercises, if you're old school like I am from the 90s and when my training was taking place, I spent a summer with a speech pathologist named Joe Stemple. And Joe Stemple developed these exercises. They were originally called the Brees exercises from the original person who developed them. But Joe really took them to another level, and he developed them further. And they were designed to strengthen the voice. And even Joe Stemple acknowledged it wasn't clear whether they were really strengthening the voice or whether they were strengthening surrounding musculature that helps support the voice. So in other words, were we really bulking up the muscle of the vocal folds, or were we actually learning to compensate in some way? And I think the verdict is still not really clear on if we can sort of add muscle mass to the vocal folds or not, but we can certainly strengthen and improve tongue. We can certainly strengthen and improve pharyngeal constrictor muscles. We can certainly strengthen and improve muscles of the velum. So I'm definitely a proponent of trying to work systematically through the pharynx, larynx, vocal tract, and do what we can, work with the muscles that we can work with.
And I think one of the things we tend to do with the voice, and there is some value with this, especially with beginning students, is just break things down into kind of separate basic components. But I really appreciate how you embrace complexity and that everything is part of a complex process, and that you acknowledge how much we don't know.
Yeah, there's so much we don't know. And sometimes I think I heard one time that Bill Gates likes to go off and just sort of have thinking time. He likes to just sit with his books, and he goes to some little cabin somewhere, and he just sits and he says, to solve really big problems, you have to have really a lot of time to just think through the complexity of the problem. And I can relate to this. There are days I'm trying to solve some issue with the larynx, and I want to think through every muscle, origin and insertion, how they function in relation to other muscles. And, those are complex algorithms that take time to sort of think through. And there is a lot we don't know. And, I wish I could say that my strategies are curing essential tremor. They're not curing essential tremor. People are reporting 60, 80% improvement. But that's a whole lot better than what we were able to offer people before. And it is a complex mechanism. And our job as teachers, of course, is to make that simple for the student, to sort of take that complex information and to try to distill it in a way that makes it palatable and easy for the student to understand. And you were a role model student because you did everything that you were asked to do times 10. And, role model client. But often people aren't quite as aware as you are. And so, we're constantly working on refining how we give people information and what we're able to do with them. And sometimes it's imitating cartoon voices. Sometimes it's can you give me a Mae West? And I know that that's doing something to the tongue, it's doing something to the velum, it's doing something here, there, and elsewhere. But the student can have some fun with that and make it so that it's palatable and accessible.
And I think the number you give, upwards of 80%, is pretty fascinating, because by no means has my tremor gone away. And if I allow it to show itself, yeah, it's there. However, I can diminish it upwards of 80%, depending on the note. And it now it's a conscious choice for me to set myself and to set my vocal tract and mechanism to override the tremor. And so I think that's what people really need to understand, because you were dealing with things like neuroplasticity and the wiring and kind of, the way you kept taking me into the worst part over and over and making me just be in the tremor. The brain was, it's not a pleasant process, but the brain was rewiring itself.
Yeah, figuring out other ways to do it. And it's not really clear, this neuroplasticity, part of what's not really clear is whether or not we are recruiting adjacent areas in the brain to help, or whether we're literally drawing from some completely different part of the brain. And the kind of the neuroscientific literature on that is not really clear, but either way, we definitely see this occurring with patients, that there is some rewiring, reconfiguration of sorts. But with tremor, and one of the aggravations about it is that it only really seems to respond to this rewiring concept if you're really diligent and you really practice over a long period of time. This is not something that occurs in a matter of a few weeks. And this is very challenging. And I think it's one of the reasons tremor patients got dismissed from speech therapy historically over the years, because typically a typical course of speech therapy, we might only see somebody 4 to 6 sessions total. And, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that. And from our work together, that this particular issue takes 3-4 months, at a minimum, 2 to 3 months, a minimum. And that's pretty diligent work. And so one of the things that I find in working with clients is that they'll give up. If they don't see progress after 3 or 4 weeks, they give up. And you cannot give up, because this takes time. The brain, you are rewiring neurological traces that you have been reinforcing for however many years you've been alive on the earth. And, you are literally developing new neurological traces, and it takes repetition and it takes a long period of time. And so I say that only to reach out to people who are perhaps older, because I think older folks have some of these same neurologic difficulties. They have reduced firing rate. The firing is slower, and it takes time. You're basically going, you're rewiring systems that have been in place 60 years, however long you've been on the earth. So that, that's one of the takeaways for me, is that if you're a speech pathologist out there listening to this podcast, these folks require more effort, and they require a longer period of time in treatment. But it gives me hope. It makes me think, gosh, if we're getting people to the somewhere between 60 and 80% where they can sort of control these sounds and get on with their day, do what they need to do. And for most of my clients who come to me with this issue, we can get them to the point where they can continue to function. They can continue to teach voice. They can continue to do what they do, and their speaking voice remains strong. But it makes me think, gosh, what will another 10 years of research and experimentation bring us? Will we eventually be able to get people to 100% as we continue to delve into the complexity of this problem, and maybe supplementing with something nutritionally, or I think there's hope for folks who have this disorder.
Well, the good news is, if you're a speech language pathologist, a voice teacher, even someone who's starting to feel perhaps this is happening in their voice, you have an online course available.
I do, and thank you for bringing that up. I have an online platform. I really developed this platform, not to make my fortune, although that would be really nice. I recently played the lotto in the hopes that I would win the big huge prize, so I could buy an endoscope for my baby. I sometimes think,
I believe that.
The neighbors would be looking over going, what are those glowing lights in the basement? What's going on over there? But anyway, but I really developed this platform as a way to just share information. And the website is called getvocal-now.com, getvocal-now.com. And there's a course on there for essential vocal tremor. And for this coming week, I'm going to mark the price down for people from $45 down to $30, because I really, if you have vocal tremor, I'd love for you to take this course. It's less than the cost of a voice lesson. It's well worth the money. I really go through a lot of the exercises and my strategies for folks, and I've kind of simplified the information to really 3 or 4 key things that I have found work with most of my clients. And so I would love for people to find that and to utilize that resource, and feedback some information to me, But again, this is something you're going to practice day in, day out, over a long period of time, at least 2 to 3 months, before you make any judgments about it. And as I said, I find that people, eventually we start to turn the corner. Eventually we start to see progress, but it's slow.
And if you were pricing for value, I can tell you this course should be in the thousands of dollars. So at $30, every voice teacher should get this. It's just absolutely fantastic. And then, Kerrie, where can people otherwise find you?
I'm at obertvoicestudios.com. And so they can find me at my website, and there's a link to connect to me on there. I just want to say too, John, that course, you could almost substitute wobbly vibrato for tremor.
Indeed.
And use those same. So if you have students who have a big, Mack truck vibrato, a big wobbly vibrato, which a lot of older people get. But I also find that people in their younger years, particularly if they've got big voices, will sometimes get a wobbly vibrato, even in their 20s. These big, huge, particularly operatic voices will get this. These same exercises apply to them. These same concepts apply to them. So as I said, if you're dealing with students who have those issues, please do check out the course as well, and just sort of substitute in your mind tremor for vibrato. Again, I look forward to hearing from you all and seeing how the things have worked for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kerrie.
Thank you, John.